So now for the next hour, we're going to be hearing from Glynn again, and then our colleague Simzia, and I'll introduce in a few minutes, on work related to this project, related to the beef industry.
Very good. You get to see more purple. Now, as noted, there are issues that are not, unique to the swine industry. Julie's opening remarks made this comment. This grant has focused a lot on the swine industry, and that's served us well. But there are some topics that are important to tackle in other species. And one of the things that Lee and I wanted to do was look at, I'm going to call it animal health information sharing. I'm going to walk you through that in a second, in the beef cattle industry. So before I go through that, real quickly for our listeners, if you're not familiar, in the beef industry, you've got a seed stock sector, you've got a cow-calf sector, and that's where the pregnant cow is and you get a calf. There's some intermediary sectors. You ultimately end up with a feedlot, and from the feedlot we sell to packing plants, you get your beef. There's multiple stages of ownership in the U.S. beef cattle industry. I'm reminding us of that, it was in my answer a minute ago. But specifically, the tracking of animal health and kind of the history of and the sourcing of animals in our industry needs to start at the cow-calf level, because that's where calf was born. And then tracking from there on is valuable. So we're honing in on the feeder cattle level, where a cow-calf operator would sell a feeder animal, think calf or yearling, to somebody else. So feedlots, stockers, backgrounders is what goes on in reality. And we're honing in on trying to understand that situation. Why are we doing this? How many of you remember the phrase, the cow that stole Christmas? Yep, so several of us remember that. I'm an economist. I read The Economist all the time, so of course I promote it whenever I get a chance. Here is an Economist article titled, The Cow Who Stole Christmas, dated December 30th of 2003. That event was actually on Christmas Eve, December 24th. Economists in this space didn't sleep much that Christmas. But ever since then, there's been a lot of, I'm just calling them discussions within the beef cattle industry and public animal health officials to attempt to increase adoption of animal identification and traceability systems, and more generally the sharing of animal health information. And there's been some, Julie, did you say bumps earlier this morning? There's been some bumps in the road in that process. In 2009, there was a study that I had the benefit to be on, a benefit cost study that was NACE, National Animal Identification System. At the time, that was the USDA-based animal identification system was being talked about. NACE no longer exists, but that was a big benefit cost study. We did a lot of work in that space. Notice that was 6 years after the BSE event. And then fast forward about a year ago, January of 2018, there was a bit of an update to that study specific to the beef industry. World Perspectives has this report up, and I've got a front page of it. You can find it. The theme through all this is trying to understand what drives producers' willingness to change how they identify their animals and their willingness to share the information with that. And there remains a lot of knowledge gaps on that, and arguably the potential benefit of that information grows more and more over time. Animals are worth more than they used to be. Trade is more important to our markets than it used to be, and we're worried about trade shocks and so forth if you have an adverse event. So the value of that information has probably grown, but we still have a lot of questions on why we're not, in a sense, voluntarily providing that information more. So that's what Lee and I are trying to tackle. It also hinges on the public-private incentives differ a lot here. Producers have different costs to participate in systems, and a real simple example I'll give you is if you're a smaller cow-calf operator who does not have your own chute and you don't currently tag your own animals, your cost to participate in a suggested system that's tagging the animals and reading that tag is going to be very different than an operation that is larger who maybe has 10 years experience with some version of individual animal handling. You're asking one producer to make a bigger change than the other. I'm not here to say that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's very different. And the cost of being in a system then is very different for those two types of producers, and that leads to differences in resistance and willingness to participate. So we're trying to tackle this question about what is the current economic situation on the willingness to participate in animal ID and traceability systems. And then secondly, I'm just going to make some broad comments related to the willingness to quickly respond to a suspicious disease, specifically FMD. If it's suspected on your operation, what drives willingness to report that to your local vet and other officials. So what did we do? The end of last year, specifically November, we worked with Beef Magazine. We conducted a pretty large survey effort with, again, economic choice experiments in them. And this is kind of two-tiered. So we purposely sent out surveys that were focused on animal identification and traceability decisions. Some of them went to the cow-calf producer, who would be the initial implementer, the one who would be tagging their calves before they sold them, so to speak. And then we also did a parallel exercise, very similar design in the exact same choice experiment context, for feedlots on their willingness to pay for those animals. So what you're doing there is you're honing in on the private market exchange of feeder animals and the willingness to supply the info and the willingness to pay for it before we get into the public specter of how to possibly incentivize that. So trying to understand the private mechanisms there first is the point of that. And then down number 3 here, and I gave a space here to kind of give us a visual break, we also had a separate exercise that was trying to understand cow-calf producers' willingness to report to their local vet or more generally animal health authorities suspicions of an animal disease, FMD specifically. So this is a graph that's a little hard to see here. On the horizontal axis, I have what's called electronic, none, and visual. We were looking at 3 different systems. So none is literally the no ID system. I just kind of sell where there's no information being conveyed. Visual would be what you might call your typical visual tag. And those that relate, understand the industry, those are prevalently used, but there's no electronic information that flows with that. So they have a use, but their use for backtracking animals in a public animal health space is limited. And then electronic tracing would be the potential gold standard, if you like, so to speak, where you have an ability to have an electronic database to maybe speed up tracing back the history of animals to help with animal disease response. What you get looking at this is, again, we have the cow-calf and the feedlot bars, no reason to expect them the same. The orange or red, depending on if you're half colorblind like me, none is the lowest, which is good in the sense that both sectors prefer. These are just at the mean levels of cost and everything else. They prefer one of the other 2 systems, but you can quickly see a difference on the none between cow-calf and feedlot. So the initial adopters, which is the cow-calf producer who has to decide whether to tag or not and which tag to use, is more likely to choose none than all else equal the feedlot would want. So before you even talk about public specter, even in the private space, we have a gap between what the sellers and the buyers are kind of wanting in the none, the no ID, no traceability system place. That's just a base situation. What's more telling to me is to take that underlying information and again project how that story changes when we change the market. And I'm going to walk you through 2 potential market changes just to make sure I kind of explain this well. You can come up with a scenario to where the world, and I'm going to say the world because it could be private or public, the world would value animals being in an electronic traceability system. There's a lot of reasons that could occur. And therefore a premium for participation developed. If that premium existed, what you can see from this very first bar right here is as the premium goes up, which is actually on our horizontal axis, you get this red bar, red line to go up. Participation rate in the electronic system goes up as you pay cow-calf producers more. That is not surprising, okay? If nothing else changes in this story, however, those animals are going to be more expensive to the buyer. Somebody's paying more for that animal. At some point, feedlots, which is the blue line here, they no longer want that at some point because the animals they're buying are more expensive, right? What I really want to focus on here to make this point is short of a public role, if you're just honing in on the private premium we're talking about, the reason I'm looking at my notes is to make sure I use the numbers right. This intersection point right here is very important. So a premium of $2.50 per head for an animal to be in an electronic system as opposed to no system would result in 41% adoption rate. Loosely speaking, 41% of the calf crop could be enrolled if we had a $2.50 premium. That, of course, leaves the 59% that is not, okay? One key take-home from this is if the public wants, or the world wants, more than 41% adoption, you're not going to get it from a premium alone because feedlots are not going to pay for it past $2.50 because it's asking them to pay for something they no longer get a benefit for. So you'd have to have a premium either upchain from the packer, from them, or somebody else, or a cost share for the cow-calf on the other end. You're not going to get it simply from the private market exchange on feeder animals if having more than 41% is important. This is the same kind of exercise, but instead of a potential carrot, economic carrot premiums, what about we bring in a big stick? So what if we discount those of you that are in the no traceability? And that's the middle pair. I'll just walk over here a bit. The middle one right here, you can see an intersection point. So as we increase the discount, as we penalize cow-calf producers being in the no traceability system, you'll see that red line goes down because at some point they change their mind and choose to participate. But likewise, feedlots actually prefer those animals because they're getting cheaper. That's why the blue line goes up. Okay, it's the same logic the other way. Now you will see actually an intersection that is at 16% at a $20 discount. Okay? What I really want you to take from this is carrots and sticks don't have the same effect, first and foremost. No reason to expect they would, but sometimes we just naively think they do. They don't. The political will to implement a carrot is very different than a stick. How you go through that is something we got to think about. But the other part is the private market incentives to increase sharing of animal health info, what we're talking about here, they exist, but they don't exist in a way you're ever going to get the majority of animals to enroll. Most of our discussion is a broader industry-wide social animal health, in the event of a disease for the betterment of the world, society, or the industry collectively. These decisions are made based on individual economics of the day. That distinction we got to keep in mind, and it shouldn't be surprising that after 20 years we're still talking about why there's partial adoption of animal ID and traceability systems, because that's the economic situation most of these producers face. That's the key reminder of this. Okay. Embedded in those comments is a reminder for me to say that technical feasibility of something, just the ability to have electronic tracing that technically works. And what I mean by that is the tags stay in, and when we read them, it's got the correct information, and there's a lifespan on the tags that we like, and those kind of things. That's important. I call that a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient for us to have things adopted. That is important here. The human behavior component, the economist says the market signals need to be there. I remind us of that because just in April, USD's updated kind of announcements on cooperative agreement for these RFID tag programs and state partnerships and so forth. And there's a place for that. I'm not against those. I'm just trying to highlight that alone is probably not going to get us complete adoption. There's going to have to be other things if you want to increase adoption and sharing of animal health information. The last thing I will share, and the reason there's not a slide on this is because it's very preliminary, so there's nothing I'm willing to share specifically. But what we're looking at on the willingness to report, because I made a comment in the third survey, is how does the government's policy in responding to a suspected FMD event impact the producer's willingness to make a quick report of a suspicion. And specifically what we're looking at is if the government policy is to vaccinate versus to do a full herd depopulation versus doing a conditional herd depop, so conditional being some of the animals are removed and not all. That distinction is pretty important, and what we're trying to identify is how producers respond in terms of their willingness to report and therefore make the public animal health officials aware of the issue. That's what we're diving into there. I do not have results to share for you, but I do think it's important, and that's the back half of that particular project, the reason I bring it up here. It fits in the broader willingness to share animal health information space, so it fits in our discussion. I just don't have a nugget of results to share with you. So with that, Chris, I'll take more questions.
Glynn, can you remind us the traceability and its efficacy relative to biosecurity in the cattle industry? Like, educate me. Why does that matter?
Oh, why does it matter? Well, I'll give the worst case answer for a second. Is in the event we have a disease, public animal health officials will try to trace it back, figure out where said animals have been, therefore find all the animals involved, right? Make decisions about how to quarantine, which states to stop moving in, all those kind of things. The ability to do that is tied to the ability to see where the animal's been. And if you have animals without any info systems in place, that's, I'll just say challenging. I'm not going to say impossible, but that burden is harder. That's why that's important there. How does it relate to biosecurity? The way I think through this is biosecurity is part of a broader set of things that are trying to mitigate either the existence of a disease or maybe control it once it exists within our system. Adoption of animal health info sharing fits in that broader story as well. That's the connection for me. Yeah.
Other questions?
Your information is really interesting. Do you think if the private ownership isn't going to be one of those things that influences considerably, or at least more than 50% to get the ID, do you think the consumer, using the consumer's willingness to pay at the tail end, would be it? Not necessarily for biosecurity, but if you bundled animal welfare, range management, all those kind of upper end things, and then made that something that was also helpful for biosecurity? Do you think that would, be the ticket?
It helps. I think to answer your question, it helps. And there's ongoing development. We could debate if it's fast enough or too slow or whatever. But there's ongoing private industry decisions to align with retailers, food service companies, and the like to provide a desired product. So I'm taking your consumer point and I'm going to twist it and I'm going to say retailer, but it's the same, I think, what you're getting at. Well, a lot of those production practice claims, whether you're going to claim you have a acceptable sustainability plan, or even if it's organic or not or whatever, there's lots of examples of those, just call them production practice claims. They need to be verified by something. Usually there's a third-party verification system in place. Sometimes they rely on versions of these tracing systems, particularly an electronic one you could use. So it's a long way of telling you, yes, I think they can help get a higher share of the animals to participate, is what you're fishing for.
Right.
But I'm going to highlight any producer that enrolls, doesn't matter which producer we're talking about making that decision, it's one thing to tag. It's another thing to say what information I'm going to put with the tag. First and foremost, you can decide whether to put the source it came from, or if I just know where we last saw it, right? You can decide whether to put vaccination history or not with it. You can choose whether or not to put the sustainability claims and the like that might have a private marketing benefit. Those are all decisions that are made on how much. I always say it's breadth, depth, and precision.
Oh, I like that.
Precision's how precise. If I tell you I'm from Kansas, that's one thing. If I tell you I'm from Manhattan, Kansas, another thing. If I tell you I'm from Waters Hall, that's even more precise, right? Depth is how far in the industry back we can go, and breadth is how much information we're catching. So how many attributes? All three of those attributes describe every traceability system that exists, and the producers are deciding which of those attributes to put in. Private marketing of consumers might help with some, but that isn't going to drive some of the disease-oriented information we kind of need. Does that make sense?
Yep, no, I was just thinking about how, one, if you thought the disease stuff could be folded in enough into what's already become somewhat of a trend. The other is maybe your information on whether the trend is sufficient to really get the whole commodity, the people to go, say, from the straight commodity market to the potential added value.
I'm not sure that made it in the mic, so I'll attempt to.
Oh, I'm
rephrase.
sorry.
You
I'm
want-
sorry. I was just wondering if you thought, my sense is on a loan, biosecurity isn't that sexy a topic to drive consumer increase in willingness to pay or increased price, but whether you could, one, fold that into the added value that you'd be getting with these other systems. And second do you think when you look at the big market, do you think that the added value strategy would be sufficient, is sufficient to really change how much it would help our biosecurity practices to jump into that added value?
In short, I think all those things help, but they're not sufficient to get the majority enrolled, is really what I would say there. And the main reason for that logic is the diversity of the cost to participate. Anything you do to increase the benefits is going to shrink the relevance of that gap. But literally, I gave you the example earlier for a reason. Somebody that does not have a chute and currently does not handle the animals individually except the day of sale, the cost for them to do anything beyond none is very different than somebody that's already choosing to participate in a production practice-based system where I'm handling the animals in a very documented way. That group that's already doing some of this is most sensitive to consumer marketing benefits and so forth, frankly, because their cost to provide it is very different than somebody that's choosing not to be a more intense manager currently.
Except if you call it natural.
But even there, you still need to verify it at some level. So, yeah.
Let's give a round of
Thank you.
applause for Glynn.